Do you think yourself as tough? It's actually a challenging question to answer. We're certainly eager as entrepreneurs, always ready to tackle the next challenge ahead. But what does toughness actually look like? Today's conversation reminds us that true resilience comes from hitting our lowest points. Some of us get hit with far more than we think we can stomach, sometimes all at once. But even when life blindsides us repeatedly, it's always on us to get back up. We have to make the choice to be tough. Shara Ruffin spent 20 years helping others as a social worker and psychotherapist. Today, she's a best-selling author, LinkedIn influencer, and the founder of Journey to Licensure. Everything she does is geared towards helping social workers to pass their license exams. But her journey was brutal. She spent years facing every personal problem imaginable, often at the same time. But she still carved out a thriving business to help social workers take control of their careers. And I think it's best if she tells you the story herself. I'm Catherine Vasilopoulos, and this is And So She Left, the podcast about incredible women founders and the wisdom they uncovered beyond the corporate world.
If I could recap it, I would probably start once I graduated from Howard University. I knew I was going to probably get my first level license as a master's degree social worker. And I went for it, missed it by 3 points the first time. This was in 2011. I took it again 2 years later, and passed it. Shortly after that, I met my future, now ex-husband. He was stationed at Fort Belvoir. Then he went to Afghanistan when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, Asia Rogers. And she was a stillborn. She was born at 7 months. And he was in Afghanistan at the time. And it was pretty much a traumatic story for the both of us because of losing her. And it was my first baby. When he returned, came my rainbow baby, Jaden. He was born with a kidney abnormality that the doctors told me he wouldn't live beyond his first birthday. He had surgery at 6 months. And at the time that he had the surgery, when he was 6 months old, he became very colic. Because the first 6 months of him being a baby, he was just a cute, sweet baby. And then when he had surgery, it was hell on wheels, really. He was very sick. My marriage was starting to fall apart as my ex-husband was transitioning out the military. And it was really just depressing for me because I was dealing with a child that was compromised. I still was dealing with the grief of my first child. I was also working a high stress level job as a therapist, working 3 hours away from home without a car, 2 buses and a train. And anytime that Jaden got sick, I would be in the hospital with him, turn back around, come into work, sleep deprived the next day. I did that for about the first 5 or 6 years of his life. It was very exhausting. The other piece to it is that I mostly compartmentalized. I could be Shara the therapist, and then at 4 or 5 o'clock, I was Shara the single mom, going through depression and drinking any bottle of wine that could dry my sorrows, and that everything fell apart. My marriage, trying to rebuild my career because it paused when I was a military wife. It was just really challenging. Shortly thereafter, once I was able to collect my hours, which it takes about 2 years, it took me about good 4.5 years. I resigned from that job in August, right when my son was hitting kindergarten. And I take my exam November 2018, and I miss it by 2 points.
Oh, no.
I was pretty devastated because of how much work, how many personal challenges I had at that point in time. I didn't know what to do. because not only did I have to deal with that, but shortly thereafter, I lost my part-time job 3 months later when I was going to retest because of the pandemic. Everything's at a standstill. I am now at home with 3 kids, my partner's 2 daughters, and then there's my son. And they're homeschooling. I am chef. I am cleaning. I am doing everything that I'm supposed to do to make sure they're feeling supported. But I'm also crumbling inside. My mind is broken. I'm financially stuck. I am having excruciating cluster headaches because of the psychosomatic stress I was getting from, where I was emotionally. And I felt like I couldn't do anything. So for 8 months, I just played Animal Crossing on my Nintendo Switch, which gave me some reprieve when I didn't have the headaches to disappear in a world that I could build. And I felt like I couldn't control anything. There was so much going on in the world and I just needed to find an escape. In August of 2020, I ended up getting on some medical assistance, and I was able to get a psychiatrist. I was able to get a doctor, and I was able to get a therapist. For the first time in my life, I took anxiety medication for my generalized anxiety disorder, which had never been treated. I found out soon after that I also was diagnosed with ADHD combined type, which I had no idea I had. Once those things were treated with medication, I was able to take my exam and I passed it. And that was pretty much the story that birthed my consulting business.
That is an incredible journey. I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm out of breath for you because that's a lot. A lot of stuff was thrown at you. It's almost like you had to endure every possible disaster a human could go through in life. And yet here you are, more resilient than ever. And you found the strength and the courage and the tools to move on from the different things. And I think that's what creates the person that you are today. You've got so many moving parts that you were able to then bring together and then create the foundation for what it is that you're doing now. Between alcoholism and migraines and no work and no insurance and a pandemic and homeschooling and all that, how did you do it all?
I don't know. I'm a very spiritual woman. I can honestly say it was a lot of hope and prayer. When people think of resilience, a lot of times on LinkedIn, they'll say, yeah, I'm it. And I just think that for me, I have this tendency I always have of pushing. I'm the oldest of 5 children. I was born to 2 teenage parents, lived in Section 8 housing, and my parents always pushed school, education, all of that. And I was always someone that felt like I needed to push no matter what the challenge or barrier was. Now, I will say that it wasn't easy. There were times where I broke down and felt like just thrown in and out. And sometimes I did. Mm-hmm. And I want people to know that there were points in those pivotal points of having postpartum depression with my son when he was born, reeling from the grief of my daughter, thinking that my son was going to replace her, and some weird sense of my wrapped up, twisted grief. And he was born and I almost gave him up for adoption because I was so into my depression at that point, on top of finding out that my ex-husband at the time wanted to end our marriage.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then it was a lot. So there were points in that, in that journey that looking back, I'm like, I don't even know how I got through it.
But what you're saying makes some sense here in that people have faith and people have hope. And those are the things that, if you continue to hold on to them, they're the catalysts that keep you moving in life. If you remove those things from people, then you have nothing. And I think you grasped onto that, whether you knew it or not at the time, but I think that's what was happening. And also I wanted to say, yay, Jaden, for surviving all this and for making it to this point. I mean, your relationship to him must be amazing.
It is. He actually just came in to hug me. He just got home from school. But yeah, he's been amazing. He's a little resilient little boy. He's been through a lot. And so for him, there's aspects of the early parts of his upbringing he will never remember, but I will. He's a straight A student. He's in homeschool and he's doing very well. And he's self-motivated and he's curious about the world. Most people on LinkedIn know him pretty well. Mm-hmm. They call him the LinkedIn child. He calls them the LinkedIn people. But yeah, he's a very resilient little boy. In the midst of what I want to say about him, in the midst of the pandemic, even after, about a year ago, I lost my baby brother. He was killed 5 blocks from me. His name was Samir. He took care of Jaden when Jaden was very young. He didn't make it to his graduation. He would have been 21 next year. And I bring him up because I remember Jaden was in the midst of second grade, I think. Despite that, losing him, one of his closest uncles, he still got straight A's and he still did well. He had moments of grief, but he still did well. And I'm looking at this child and I'm like, he had some struggles with grief and giving him support, but he still refocused and did what he needed to do. And I just think, my God, what a resilient little boy.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes. And I think that whether we know it or not, our children observe what we're doing. And maybe he sees what you do without actually knowing what you do. But it's how you do it. It's the persistence. It's the, leading by example, as opposed to just, do what I say, not what I do. And I think that he is resilient because his mama is resilient too. I would love to go back and talk about that video that you posted on LinkedIn and how that catapulted your LinkedIn presence. Can you tell me more about that?
So with LinkedIn, I met a influencer who she had 1 million followers at the time. She was doing audits. I reached out to her and she was doing LinkedIn audits of profiles. And I remember her telling me, Shara, you have 30,000 connections. What are you doing, these connections? I said, nothing. I'm just giving mental health support. And she says, you're hiding behind a shiny profile. People don't know you. They're not going to trust you. I didn't have a business or anything. I was like, so? She's like, I want you to do video for 90 days. I'll never forget that, because me doing video for 90 days, and this is in the midst of right after I had quit my job, and I started doing video when I was cooking, cleaning, around my son Jaden, which LinkedIn got to know a lot, because I would homeschool him. I would do video, and I would just talk about the depression. I would talk about not passing my exam. I would talk about some of those challenges, and people got to see that in real time. And it was unorthodox to talk about those things on LinkedIn because it's a business platform. But to me, the way I looked at it is if people were responding to mental health stories and me sharing in written form some of the challenges I had, even as a therapist, I thought it would be more powerful to share those things in real time about where I was, because the impression of someone looking at a profile and someone's accomplishments and all of that doesn't really mean much because social media lies, right? So I wanted people to see where I was in real time, but I was building a personal brand without even knowing it.
That's interesting. So the true you was the brand, not the shiny accomplishments, education profile, etc.
Yeah.
Do you think it's because people don't want to see the smooth edges? They want to see the rough edges first in order to get to know you?
I think so. And some people are afraid of that. I've been told. I know for me, it was almost a release for me to be able to get beyond that perfected profile. And I found that people found it a little intimidating later on. But it wasn't until people really started to get to know me that I talked about some of the struggles I had that people really felt connected, especially during the pandemic. When I was sharing that I was broken, I was really feeling stuck, and I was on food stamps at the time. And I just was really struggling. People were like, what? You're struggling with all the stuff that you have? And that's all they saw. But when I started sharing those intricate parts of the day in and day out, people really felt connected to me. So when I did eventually form a business and had things to offer, it kind of took off on its own. But I think it's because I connected that trust early on, especially when I was in the midst of my struggles.
Tell me also about your experience with Clubhouse and who you were able to help in that respect.
around that time, I wasn't in practice. This is January 2021. And I decided to get on Clubhouse because I was told by my mentor, hey, get on Clubhouse. And I was like, what is this? Another app I'm going to have to learn. So I figured I'd get on there and I found it very comforting. I started sharing my story to other groups of social workers. And I started doing a study group every Monday night for about 5 or 6 months. And what I found was that with me sharing my story every single time, it connected people to me. They started to trust me more. And I was freely doing it. I wasn't charging anything. People started passing their exams, which was amazing. And then I was told by another mentor that this is great, but you still need to look at probably turning this into a business since you're not doing anything else. And then I ended up getting an LLC and turning it into a consulting business based on what my expertise was, exam coaching, as well as my social work experiences.
That's fantastic. So you were to me, you're a person who knew how to leverage the platforms to be able to go out and reach out to different groups of people. And did you also help people with special needs?
I did. In my time of doing this work, I've had so many different success stories of social workers who really needed help. I remember the first 6 months, one of the stories I share, her name was Shannon Shriver. She was a social worker in Boston who was deaf. And I remember her reaching out to me on Facebook and she was like, I think you can help me. And she saw people passing her exam. I was like, I don't know if I can help you because I don't speak American Sign Language, but she was very adamant about it. So we worked together on Zoom for about 7 weeks. She passed her exam on the first try. This lady, I found out later that during that time, she would have been in danger of losing her job if she did pass her clinical exam. She had 2 small children and her husband had died from cancer shortly during the pandemic. So she was a widow. I had no idea she was going through all those things, and she trusted me enough to get her through that process. I've also had my first client who was blind. Her name was Tanisha Tate, passed her master exam on the first try. So many other people who have had TBIs, ADHD like me, debilitating anxiety, PTSD, different disorders. These are my colleagues that needed help with their license exam, but they needed more of a holistic process that I was able to provide. The profound joy I get when I get a text or a call from someone saying I passed after the 11th time, because I had that happen, or someone saying they passed after having debilitating anxiety after failing and missing by several points. Rashida, my last client, she passed her exam on the 7th try. It's a reminder that, it's more than a license to them. This is their livelihood. This is their
Right, exactly.
what they're working towards. And they deserve that license. But what they got to go through to get it sometimes it's very debilitating. And I know that journey very, very well.
And also, you went at it initially as a social worker, meaning somebody who is selfless and wants to be a helper. To go from that then to being an entrepreneur, you have to change your mindset. What had to change for you in order to get to where you are now?
Oh boy. So, yes. So I had to really look at my time a little differently. For the first 5 or 6 months, I was doing work for free and I wasn't used to asking for money. There was an interesting conversation that was had with my coach where he says, Shara, I need you to monetize your services. And I was like, I don't think my clients can afford what you're, telling me that they can. And he says, this has more to do with you than it does with them. And I didn't realize it did, that I needed to value myself more, that my experiences were worth something. And within 30 days, I saw $10,000 in my account. I was wondering like, holy crap, what just happened? And it was because I had to make a mindset shift. In my world of social work, social workers are cultivated and we're taught we are there to give up to others, which we are. However, the flip side to that is social workers are usually underpaid and they often are undervalued. At that time, I needed to make that switch in my mindset from being a person that was just giving still giving, but also being someone to know that my time, my value, my expertise was worth it.
And I think people would very much have a lot to learn from your experience. I do believe you went through something incredible to get you to where you are today. And I think that people will listen, and especially since they know you already, you did something phenomenal for yourself by creating that online brand, and allowing people into your home and into your personal space. Like how did that feel for you? Because not everybody can do that.
There were times I will say that I was like, well, is this too much? And when I would get a message from someone saying, thanks for sharing, I definitely can relate. It helps me know, I think probably from my therapist days of, being a therapist and knowing that there were people that would not ever walk into my office because they were scared or they were still ridden with stigma. And I know what that's like.
Mhm.
So having that mental health background, but also being someone that knows what it is to suffer in silence, helps me use myself as a vehicle to be that light to someone else in a dark tunnel. When people say I was really building a personal brand, I didn't even know what that was. At the time, I had experienced something and I wanted people to know that they could accomplish anything, despite the challenges that life will give you,
Right.
as long as you're breathing.
Exactly. And you have a background in mental health and other healthcare branches. When you were going through your own depression, did you know that's what it was?
I did, but I kind of, I think I went into my own dysfunctional patterns of coping. For me, maladaptive coping was something that I did a lot back then. And there were periods where I had a therapist, I had support. And I think that pretty much happened 4 years ago after getting to the other side of it. When I reflect back on those experiences now, I don't cringe at them. It's like, well, if this happened, this is what I got from it. And I actually appreciate that journey now more
Mhm.
than I did when I went through it, of course.
Right, right. You mentioned maladaptive coping. What does that look like?
From a clinical standpoint, maladaptive coping just means that you're engaging in dysfunctional patterns that are comfortable to you, but they have an impact on your overall functioning.
So, like, for example,
So
drinking or.
drinking, yep. So this would be a good example. So using me as an example, when I was going through, oftentimes, probably the first 3-4 years of Jaden's life, 3 years, I want to say, especially the first three. Once I got home from work, I would be on the way to pick him up. I would go get like Budweiser margarita. I can't even stand to look at those now. But back then, I could have a bottle of wine and we'd be gone the same day. And knowing that was a dysfunctional pattern that was in my family, alcoholism was very heavy. And it was a way that I learned to cope at times. Of course, I didn't have to go treat it or anything. I was able to kind of go cold turkey. And drinking now for me is like, if I have a glass of wine, it's for the taste. It's not to drown anything. It's a huge difference. But back then, it was really just to escape.
Is it a control thing as well?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
And I think what you were mentioning also with the video game too, when we were all, locked in and we just had to find ways to cope and get through the pandemic, engaging your brain in an activity that allowed you to structure something or build something or create something is also a form of control, I guess. Maybe not in the same way as consuming alcohol, but I'm guessing it's something along those lines too, right? It's a coping
I think
mechanism.
so. Yeah. It was, and I found it comforting that it wasn't just for me, that it was me. That game was groundbreaking for what it was. It's kind of like Sims, but it was groundbreaking at the time because it connected people in a way because a lot of people couldn't see each other at the time. So it was a way that people could communicate and visit each other's little islands, and it kind of faded away now. But back then it was a way that people could kind of like disappear into building their own worlds and yes, have control. The parallel for me between the alcohol, years prior and then the gaming, the parallel was just the piece that you talked about. The centerpiece was being able to control something because I felt like I had none.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. And escapism, I guess part of it is that as well.
Yes, that's exactly what they called it for Animal Crossing. I remember reading about it. It was escapism.
I'm also listening to you speaking and your story and all that. And how did you learn to be so open in terms of being able to share all this? You're okay with sharing the boo-boos and the band-aids, as opposed to wanting to gloss it all over. Where did you, I don't know, because for me, it's a little bit harder to show all those parts of me that I don't want people to see.
I think for me, it took me a long time to get to that place. Most people wouldn't believe that I'm an introvert by nature. I am. I like,
You are?
I am. You're laughing, Catherine. I am. People just like, what? It's just like when Beyonce says she's an introvert. She is. She has another side to her that she's like, I don't want to be bothered with anybody.
Yeah.
And for me, it's the same thing. It's not being fake. It's just another facet of my personality. And it's one that I've had to cultivate over time. The other piece is that growing up, I was seen and not heard. That was the culture that I was born into. Even culturally from African American community, that was the raising of the children. It's a common thread in African American families. My voice was shunned pretty early. So it took me many years to find that. It took me a long time to be comfortable with all pieces of myself and to make peace with, this is what happened. This is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
What can I gain from it? What can I extract from it that can be a lesson for somebody else because it's no longer of service to me. And that's how I look at it.
And in a child's life, when they're being told, be quiet, what does that do? Like, what do you remember about that as a kid?
Well, there wasn't really much be quiet. My father was emotionally and physically abusive. So he was also in the military, in the Navy, and he was physically and emotionally abusive to my mother. And that was the experience of trauma that I grew up in. So it pretty much had a lot to do with, I think, the pathology of that part of my personality and cultivating, that I'm at now a point in my life where I'm not willing to keep quiet.
Because I know our childhood years are very formative and they dictate somehow what happens later. And I feel like you have taken the bull by the horns in such an incredible way and you've transformed everything. Like, you're really impressive to me. Yeah. I want to know, from all the challenges that you've had in your life, and you've had many, which one is the one that you think has brought you the furthest?
I would say being a mother.
Okay.
And I mean that in a very positive way. I never understood love in the way that I do now. Looking at my son, sometimes I still squint my eyes like, oh my God, I'm a mom. Even though, I'm 9 years in, he's growing and he's getting bigger, but I look at him and I see a facet of myself, of course, his father as well. But, and I just think, my God, I'm no longer scared of being responsible for another human being. In the beginning, I was. And now to watch him just grow up beautifully, finding his own personality, his own voice, asking questions, and shaping and cultivating him, but allowing him to have the freedom to shape his own personality, his own thoughts, is a beautiful part of a childhood that I hope he remembers, because I didn't have that luxury. Mm-hmm. And that's the part as a parent that I find that's very rewarding, because as much as I feel at times I have nothing to do with his upbringing, I know I do in terms of my attachment relationship with him. But yeah, being a mom has had its challenges, but it's also been beautiful to see what's come of it, especially now.
Thank you so much to Shara Ruffin. You can learn more about the journey to licensure through the link in the episode description. If you like the show, please rate, review, and subscribe to And So She Left wherever you listen. Your feedback helps us to better serve current listeners and reach new ones. We also have an exciting announcement to share. And So She Left has been nominated for 2 International Women's Podcasting Awards. A very big thank you to Michelle Rado and Tildy Peterson, whose episodes were nominated. And of course, thank you to you for listening. And So She Left is made by Cansulta and Ethan Lee. We'll be back next Wednesday with a new episode. Our music is by Chris Zabriskie, edited for your enjoyment, and you can find a list of all the songs you heard here in the episode notes. I'm Catherine Vasilopoulos, and thanks for listening.